We are grateful for your time today. But before we get started, I would like to introduce Mr. Conrad Washington, Director of the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, who will be providing today's welcoming remarks. Mr. Washington serves as the Director and is retired from the United States Marine Corps with 20 years of active duty service with a combat tour in 2004 in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom 2. Mr. Washington is a licensed minister actively serving in his faith. He received his master's degree of divinity in pastoral studies from Moody Theological Seminary. He also holds a master's in business management and a bachelor of science degree in education. Additionally, he is a graduate of VA's class of 2017 Virtual Aspiring Leaders Program. At this time, I give you Mr. Conrad Washington for today's opening remarks. Mr. Washington?
Hey, thank you, True. I appreciate it. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. There are a lot of choices still after COVID to join virtual webinars, so we appreciate you stopping by the Department of Veteran Affairs Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships as we continue to have the 3 to 4 webinars each month on topics regarding our veterans. I want us to all keep in our prayers and our thoughts the situation overseas, the hostages that are still being held, and no matter what side of the fence you stand with your beliefs, I believe it's a fair statement for us all to want mutual respect for mankind. I mentioned when speaking and preaching that love is a common attribute in many faith denominations. So we don't have to always agree to respect and to extend love. So let's just join to advocate for victims of hatred that's plaguing the world. Because as it relates to here in the VA, we must be able to respect people from all backgrounds, all faith, all ethnicities to serve our veterans, their families, caregivers, and beneficiaries. So with all that being said, this month is National Native American Indian Heritage Month, which is recognized every November. The Observation Month honors American Indians for their respect for natural resources and the earth, for their having served with valor in our nation's conflicts, and for their many distinct and important contributions to the United States. So we honor and give voice to the rich cultural heritage of Indigenous people. And also I would mention that it's also National Family Caregivers Month, along with Military Family Month. So I want to thank all of you again for joining us. I want to thank specifically Jay, the director for the National Cemetery Scheduling Office, and he's the deputy director rather, and Steve Ecker, the assistant director. I want to thank you both for joining us again as we continue this road and path of educating and informing the nation about veteran programs and information. So with all that being said, thank you all for joining us, and I hope you will enjoy today's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. At this time, I would like to introduce Mr. J. Dalrymple, Director of the National Cemetery Administration Scheduling Office, who will provide some opening remarks. Please read a summary of his bio to the left of the screen. Mr. Dalrymple has been the Director of the National Cemetery Scheduling Office and Deputy Director of Field Programs since October 13, 2019. He is responsible for all scheduling and eligibility activities, including pre-need determinations for veterans and their family members. Mr. Dalrymple graduated in 2019 from the National Cemetery Administration Comprehensive Year-Long Cemetery Director Intern Program. Mr. Dalrymple is an Air Force veteran. At this time, I give you Mr. J. Dalrymple for today's opening remarks. Jay?
Thank you, Trulesta, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the privilege to speak with you today. As Trulesta said, my name is Jay Dalrymple. I'm with the VA's National Cemetery Administration. I'm the director of the National Cemetery Scheduling Office located in St. Louis, Missouri. With me today is Steve Ecker, who is the assistant director of the scheduling office. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the National Cemetery Administration, or NCA, the VA operates 155 national cemeteries along with 34 soldiers' lots and monument sites in 42 states and Puerto Rico as well. There are more than 4 million Americans, including veterans of every war and conflict, buried in VA's national cemeteries. Veterans have earned these benefits through their service and sacrifice to our nation. The scheduling office was established to support our veterans and their family members during one of their most difficult times in their lives. Almost all requests for burial in a national cemetery now come through the scheduling office. We like to say we're the gateway to NCA. So today we're here to provide you with information on a couple of very important topics. First topic is looking at the high-level eligibility requirements for burial in a VA national cemetery. And then we're going to talk about the pre-need burial program NCA offers to veterans, service members, and their dependents. We also want to answer any questions you may have about the National Cemetery Administration and the pre-need program. So thank you for your attendance and the opportunity to present this information to you.
Thank you so much, Jay. Now I would like to introduce our presenter for today, Mr. Steve Ecker. Steve is the Assistant Director of the National Cemetery Scheduling Office since April 12, 2020. In this position, Mr. Ecker is responsible for assisting the Director with all scheduling and eligibility activities for veterans and their families. Mr. Ecker is a Navy veteran. He is a member of the United States Navy Ceremonial Guard, Joint Base Anacostia, Bolden, Washington, D.C. At this time, I would like to introduce Mr. Steve Ecker, our presenter for today. Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Trulesta and Mr. Washington. It's always a pleasure to speak with the group. Hope you find this information informative. It's a lot of information, but it's good information to have and take back to your families or your workplaces. So if we could, let's go ahead and get into it. Can everybody see the slides? Sorry about that, everyone. Let me screen share it here. My apologies.
Mr. Ecker, I'll take over the slides if you would just say next slide, sir.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so you have them, William. Next slide, please. And next slide. Okay, sorry about that, everyone, for those technical difficulties. We got it figured out here. As Jay said, we're going to cover a few different things. We're going to talk about the general eligibility requirements for burial in a national cemetery, what is included in the burial benefit, some frequently asked questions that we've gathered from other sessions that we thought would be helpful. We'll discuss who is eligible for burial, and we'll discuss the pre-need eligibility program. how to apply for the pre-need eligibility determination, and how to fill out VA form for the pre-need. Next slide. So let's talk first about what is included in the burial benefit. Burial benefit includes a gravesite in any of our national cemeteries with available space, and most can accommodate a casket or cremation burial. Grave liner or grave vault, the opening and closing of the grave, and perpetual care of that gravesite. A government headstone, marker, or niche cover, a burial flag, presidential memorial certificate, and military honors are also part of the services provided at the cemetery. Although they're not actually part of the burial benefit, our office helps to coordinate with the families to get those scheduled with the respective military honors groups for presentation at the cemetery as part of the ceremony. Next slide. So let's talk about a few of the things that are not included in the burial benefit. Those include costs associated with funeral home preparation services, costs pertaining to cremation services or purchase of a casket or an urn, transportation of any sort to include transportation to the National Cemetery, any costs that are incurred for having to incur storage at the funeral home, and costs for obtaining a gravesite if the family chooses not to inter in a national cemetery, but a private cemetery. The costs for interment in that private cemetery would not be covered. For those who do choose to be buried in a private cemetery, the VBA, they do have a VA burial allowance to assist with the funeral cost. It's a set monetary allowance that it's administered by the Veteran Benefits Administration. So for more information, you can reach out to VBA's main line to see if you may qualify and how to apply. Also not included are any costs associated with disinterment of an individual from a private cemetery to a national cemetery. Next slide, please. So let's talk about some frequently asked questions. So as I mentioned, we've done several iterations of these. We always get good questions, so we thought we'd capture some of these as we've gone along, which we thought would be kind of helpful. First question, can I be buried in any national cemetery? Veterans and eligible dependents, they can be buried in any cemetery with available space. There are no geographical restrictions. We get questions a lot, well, I live in California, but most of my family's on the East Coast. It's perfectly fine to be buried somewhere in New York. So there are no geographical restrictions. Is the spouse required to be buried in the same national cemetery as the veteran? Along the same lines, there are no geographical restrictions. A veteran and a spouse do not have to be interred in the same national cemetery. Will my spouse be buried next to me or with me in the same gravesite? Non-veteran spouses of eligible veterans are interred in the same gravesite. In instances where both spouses are eligible veterans in their own right, they have an opportunity to request a set aside or an adjacent grave site where they will be buried next to their spouse at their time of need. But generally, if it's a non-veteran spouse, they're buried or interred in the same plot with the veteran. Does it matter if I'm casket or cremated? Does not matter to us, but it does depend on site availability at the national cemetery that's selected. Not all cemeteries can accommodate cremations or caskets, so it all depends on what that cemetery can accommodate. Does the National Cemetery Administration manage Arlington Cemetery? There's a lot of confusion on this, and we come across many who may think Arlington is actually the only national cemetery in the country. But as Jay mentioned, the VA, we oversee 155 national cemeteries, but Arlington National Cemetery is actually ran by the Department of the Army and not the VA. So inquiries for Arlington National Cemetery should be directed directly to Arlington. Next slide. All right, some additional questions. Is my wife listed on the headstone also? Veteran information is generally on the front and the spouse's information is presented on the back of the headstone. Can I get a headstone if I'm cremated? Yes, the answer is yes. A headstone or marker is required for all remains types. So whether casketed or cremated, there will be a headstone or marker memorializing the return. Are there costs to have my spouse buried? Similar to the veteran, there are no costs for burial benefits provided by the VA. If it's an eligible spouse, that benefit carries over from the veteran to the spouse. But again, families are responsible for funeral home and other expenses required before arriving at the cemetery. So the easiest way we like to explain it is, once you drive through the cemetery gates with your loved one, the VA picks up everything from there. Can I request just a service and military honors if I'm not being interred in a national cemetery? The answer is yes. That's considered a memorial service. What will happen there is families are allotted time for a service and military honors if they choose at one of the shelters, but there is actually no interment. And this applies if the individual will be buried in a private cemetery, or maybe the family isn't ready to lay their loved one to rest, and maybe they're cremated, and the family may want to hold on to their loved one for a little bit. It's perfectly fine. We have families that do that and may come back a month, 3 months, 3 years later. But so there are no time restrictions on when the interment can take place. What is the difference between in-ground cremation burial and being placed in the wall? Ground cremation burial is as it sounds. It's more of like a traditional casketed burial where the urn is placed to rest inside the ground, similar to a casket burial. Columbarium, as many may see, or some refer to them as walls or mausoleums, that's when the urn is placed above ground in the niche. Next slide. A few more questions. If you are 100% service connected, what will the VA cover if buried in a national cemetery? VA covers all services and products included in the burial benefit, as I've outlined. And again, anything once you drive through the cemetery gates is covered by the VA benefit. And that it's the liner, opening and closing of the grave, perpetual care, burial flag, and presidential memorial certificate. Does the VA help to pay to reserve a grave site at an outside private cemetery? As I mentioned earlier, those costs would not be covered if the family does choose to inter in a private cemetery, and the associated costs would be family responsibility. However, the family can and may be eligible for a VA government headstone that the VA provide free of charge. So that's always an option. If the family does choose a private cemetery, they do have the option to see if they're eligible to be furnished a VA headstone. Is there a time limit for requesting burial? My husband's cremated remains were not placed in the VA National Cemetery at his time of passing 3 years ago, and am I still able to apply? This kind of goes into what I was mentioning before. There are no time restraints or requirements for requesting burial. Family choose to keep their loved one, that's their choosing, and whenever they're ready to inter in one of our cemeteries, they'll contact us here at the scheduling office, and we'll be happy to assist. My dad and I are both veterans, so we need 2 separate VA Form 10,007 forms and another for my mother, correct? So it's very important, and as we'll get into later in the presentation, for every individual requesting a pre-need determination, a separate form is needed. This includes veterans and their spouses. Next question, can you use your VA award letter with all the information on it to apply for a pre-need determination? The answer is yes, you can use that, but the DD-214 or discharge document is the required legal document that we will use to determine eligibility. We can determine eligibility based on a service-connected disability rating of 0% or greater, as indicated on that award letter, and use additional information in our VA systems to initially approve the burial, but we will always go out and get a copy of that DD 214 to verify the military service and to ensure we have all the information that is memorialized on the headstone, which we'll talk about later. Next slide. So let's talk about the headstone. As I mentioned, the headstone or marker is part of the VA burial benefit. What information goes on the headstone? As you can see, there's an example of a picture of an upright marble headstone. Generally, it's the person's legal name, as indicated on the discharge document, the branch of service, beginning and ending years of the person's life, and the section and the grave number. Family also has additional options for some additional inscriptions, but those are covered by the cemetery. So as we schedule the interment at the National Cemetery will reach out to the family as part of their planning before the service to go over the information on the headstone and provide the family with their options. Next slide. So let's now talk about who's eligible for burial in a national cemetery. The long answer: veteran service members, spouses, and dependents may be eligible for burial if they meet one of the requirements. So a veteran who didn't receive a dishonorable discharge, or a service member who died while on active duty for training, or inactive duty for training. Spouse or a minor child of a veteran, and that applies even if the veteran does predecease. In some cases, unmarried adult children that are incapable of self-support with mental or physical ailments can be eligible in some cases. Next slide. So let's talk about the definition. How does NCA define a veteran? We define the veteran as a person who served on active military, naval, or air service and was just discharged or released from that service under conditions other than dishonorable. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the common persons eligible groups that we see on a daily basis. Let's first talk about veterans that served prior to September 7, 1980. Prior to September 7, 1980, a veteran with one or more days of active service would qualify for burial. And officers that enlisted on or before October 16, 1981 would be eligible. So an important takeaway from this presentation when you're talking about eligibility is that September 7, 1980 is an important date because, as we'll go over on the next slide, after September 7, 1980, the law then required 24 consecutive months of service, 2 years. So prior to that, as long as the individual was in an active component and served at least one day on active duty, they would qualify for burial. Slide. So let's talk about after September 7, 1980. As I said, the law now requires 24 consecutive months of active service for anyone who enlisted in a regular component after September 7, 1980, and for officers after October 16th of 81. Slide. So some other persons eligible. Individuals that are receiving a pension or a compensable status. So anyone who is receiving a pension or is deemed service connected. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of confusion out there and a lot of people that aren't aware. As long as the individual is rated at 0% or greater, that qualifies them for burial. Next slide. So now let's talk about the spouses. A spouse or unremarried spouse of a veteran who obtained veteran status is eligible. So what we do here is, as long as that spouse was married to the veteran at their time of death, that benefit carries over to that spouse. For remarried surviving spouses, whose deaths occurred before January 1st, 2000, remarried. The remarriage to the non-veteran must have been terminated by divorce or the death of the non-veteran. So it gets a little sticky in some of these situations, but in a lot of these cases, we'll use the death certificate just to verify that legal marital status. Next slide. So now let's kind of change gears and talk about some of the common denial reasons. Unfortunately, not everyone qualifies for burial in a national cemetery, but what we pride ourselves on here at the scheduling office is doing everything we can to get the yes. We pride ourselves on maybe being a little different than some of our VA counterparts, where we're very proactive in going out and getting the documents and everything we need for the family. We work closely with the National Personnel Records Center, which is also here in St. Louis. So we'll go out and get all that information. We want to turn over every rock we can to see if there's any kind of piece of information that would qualify someone. But for those who do not qualify, some of the common denial reasons are DVA, or dishonorable for VA purposes. That's when the information sent to a regional office and it's adjudicated, and the VA determines that the individual service does not qualify for VA purposes. One of the main categories of individuals who don't qualify are reservists and National Guard persons who served active duty for training, who didn't have qualifying active service. For active duty for training, for reservists and National Guards persons, they would have had to have been called to active duty. And for guard members, it's important to note, and there's a lot of confusion on this that we see, but the National Guard, they would have had to have been called to active duty under Title 10 or federal orders in order to qualify, and they would have had to have successfully completed the order for which called to active duty honorably. So unfortunately, we see a lot of individuals who may go through most of their life thinking that they do qualify. So we're doing everything we can to get that information out to the public and kind of inform everyone and educate them on the exact requirements. Active duty for training is another common denial reason. That's generally your reservist who might have served their 6 or 8 years honorably, but were never called to active duty for other than training. So you may know, or you may be a reservist, and every 6 months they'll go to their active duty for training. That service does not actually qualify for burial. It's not considered active duty. Some other reasons, as you can see on the screen, I won't get into them all. There are many different categories, and eligibility is, can get quite complex, but there are some where we can't find any military information on. But again, in those cases, we'll work with the family to see if they have any additional information to maybe open any pathways that we didn't see before. Next slide. So let's talk about pre-need eligibility. So before we just were talking about the general eligibility requirements, but now we're going to focus on the pre-need program. The pre-need program is a newer program within the last 6-7 years that allows families to apply in advance of need or in advance of death to see if they are eligible for burial. It can, and the whole purpose of this was to make the burial planning process easier and to eliminate delays at the time of need. Pre-need, again, does mean before the time of need, and it's important to take back and to share with others. Please don't complete a pre-need determination if you're requesting a time of need burial. So if the individual did pass away, you would call the scheduling office and we would handle the time of need burial. Next slide. So let's talk a little more about the pre-need program details. Pre-need eligibility is for VA national cemeteries only. And another important takeaway from this is it does not ensure a space in any particular cemetery, and it's not a reservation. So we hear from families and some of our VA counterparts, that they'll say, oh, we'll reach out to the scheduling office to make your reservation, for one of their national cemeteries. The pre-need program is simply just a verification at this time that individual would qualify for burial in one of our national cemeteries, but it is not for any particular national cemetery. We do that because an individual may want to be buried, for instance, let's say Jefferson Barracks, because it's here in St. Louis, but in 20 years, that cemetery will most likely be full. Well, it will be full. So at that time, they would have to choose another cemetery. So again, not a reservation. It's just a determination, letting the individual know that they are eligible at their time of need. It helps to ease that burden for them. Recommended applicants for the pre-need program, as I discussed, unmarried adult children or physically or mentally disabled. Sometimes proving unmarried adult children takes a little time, so we want to get those requests in for pre-need so we can get some of that legwork out of the way. As I discussed, reservists who are unsure if their service qualifies. Well, I served 8 years. I might have been called up. I think I was called up under Title 32, a state call up. Not sure if I qualify. Those are the individuals we want to get their records and look at so we can make that determination and let the family know. And any individual or family members with any kind of questions about their eligibility. If you didn't serve in a regular component or still unsure, or those are the individuals that we'd really like to help out to eliminate that burden and eliminate it at the time of need. Next slide. So what information do I need to apply? So like most VA benefits and really anything you apply for, there is general information that's required: Social Security number, date and place of birth, military status, service history, any military information that they have, of course, any discharge documents that they may have. Generally, after late 60s, the DD-214 is the main document we'll be looking for. So we always say err on the side of more information. For surviving spouses or unmarried adult children, we may need death certificates. For unmarried adult children, we need some different statements from the family and maybe the family attending doctor for that individual with some different information. Next slide. So let's talk about preparing to apply for a pre-need determination. So the screen there shows the VA form. Like every VA benefit, there is a required form, unfortunately. But what you want to do is choose the VA National Cemetery where you prefer to be buried. So again, I stress prefer there. We do intake the preferred national cemetery, but again, it doesn't guarantee you a spot in that national cemetery. And it's for VA national cemeteries only. The application does not apply for Arlington. So what you want to do is gather your supporting documents, have the family, go through their homes, their safe deposit boxes, where their important information are, get their documents. And for each claimant, we need a pre-need that is requesting a pre-need determination. We need a separate form. So in the next few slides, we'll kind of get into the form, but it's very important that each person requesting a determination, we have a form signed by them. Next slide. So let's get into the form a little bit. So it's a 3-section form. The first section is all about the veteran or service member. So for instance, if this was a spouse filling this application out, this wouldn't be the spouse information. This is the veteran information. So as you can see on the screen, we need all the information populated, as much information you have on the military service data. Ideally, the individual will have their DD-214 and can just transcribe the information in the boxes. But if the family doesn't have a discharge, as much information as they can provide is better. Next slide. So section 2 now is specific to the claimant. This is the individual requesting a determination. So this could be, as you can see In box 24, this could be the veteran or service member themselves. This could be the spouse or surviving spouse. This could be the unmarried adult child or other. So this is specific to the individual that's actually requesting the determination. So it's important, again, if this is a spouse, this would be the spot for the spouse information. But up top in section 1, that would be the veteran information. Slide. And section 3 is the signature and certification section. So again, this needs to be signed by each individual claimant. Section 2 that's requesting the pre-need determination. And in this box here, in box 34, if someone's applying on behalf of someone, power of attorney or those type of situations, the individual may be incapacitated or unable to do it. That's where you would indicate that on this section of the form. Next slide. So we went over the form. How does someone apply? The preferred method is through va.gov, through our website. We also do accept paper applications, and you can download the VA form 40-10007. Those can be submitted via mail or by fax. And of course, for most things, for faster processing, we ask you to submit all documentation with your application. So we always say err on the side of more information. And those are information such as discharge documents, marriage certificates, death certificates, any information that you would think would be helpful to help in our search. Next slide. So what happens after you apply? Our goal is to complete your application within 120 days. I'm happy to say that right now we're well ahead of that. So generally right now we're turning around applications in 2 to 3 weeks. That's kind of fluid and fluxes as we see fluxes in our volumes, but our goal is to respond within 120 days with the determination. Once we do, we will send an information packet via the Postal Service with your determination letter. If for any reason after you apply, you have additional questions, our number's on the screen. Option 4 gets to our pre-need department. They're here Monday through Friday from 8 to 4:30 Central Time. They'll be happy to check the status and answer any questions that you have. You will receive a on-screen confirmation when you submit via website. So that will be your confirmation. And we do ask that please wait to hear back on your application rather than resubmitting. Resubmitting just results in duplicate requests that can delay the process. Next slide. Okay, I thought I had one more, but that's all I had to share with you. So I hope that this information was informative. It's a lot in a little bit of time, but if you have any questions, they'll go, True will go over some of the things, but again, happy to present to the group and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. And that was very, very well informed. Now we will address any questions in the Q&A box. And we're going to read the questions out loud so that even the folks on the phone can hear the question and your response. The first question comes from Don Martin, and his question is, can I prepay expenses for internment?
Well, as I mentioned, there are no expenses for interment in a national cemetery. So if you're referring to maybe fees that would be incurred at the funeral home or kind of a pre-planning with the funeral home, that's your choice. But it's important to note that other than, a casket or casket fees or preparing the body or cremation fees, there are no fees to receive an eligibility determination from the VA. So
yes.
My best thought would be maybe talk to the funeral home, and kind of see what they say, but, I'd just be cautious to pay anything up front, especially if someone's trying to say that there is cost incurred for receiving a determination from the VA. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Martin, for submitting that question. Question 2 comes from Michelle Lewis. If a veteran did not quite make 2 years, would they still be eligible for a flag?
Well, the answer is
Mhm.
in most cases, they would still be able to receive a flag. First, we would kind of see, did they serve after September 7th? So I would encourage, that person to apply or do a pre-need to see if they do qualify for burial. But if they didn't, generally, the VA wouldn't furnish the flag, but a lot of times families are able to take their honorable discharges to a post office, and they issue burial flags. So that's also an option.
Thank you so much. Our next question is coming from Miss Melinda Church, and she wants to know what is the turnaround time for the scheduling office to make a decision? What title does it fall under and the statute number?
So the turnaround time, I guess if it's a time of need burial, and the family has the discharge document, we can do it all right there on the call. So we could determine eligibility. We could work with the family to see if the day they want, and time is available at the cemetery, and we can schedule it all at that time. If for some reason it's a time of need burial and we need to request further information, we would send that to our eligibility office. And then we go to the National Personnel Record Center or wherever source we need to get the information. And that sometimes can take, several days to do that. So as far as what title, I'm not sure what you're referring to there. But for title, so I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but if you wanted to clarify, maybe in an email, I could respond.
Okay, Melinda, if you want to further get additional information, just send us another question, clarifying what do you mean by title, what title falls under, and the statute number. I think it sounds like she thinks it may be a law, something that she's talking about. I'm not sure, but we can get her to clarify that more, and you can further answer her question. The next question comes from Ed Van Dyke. What is the main benefit of this form other than having a certificate of eligibility when applying for the gravesite?
So that really is the benefit. And again, the program was introduced just to take the burden off the family, so they know ahead of time. And then if they're not eligible, they can make other plans. So what we do is once we make the determination, we'll mail out an approval letter. There's a holder envelope for it. And that's essentially what it is. It's just kind of saying that you are eligible for burial. Then at the time of need, we'll have that information and letter on file. So that will greatly reduce the steps needed at the time of need when the family does call in. Again, it doesn't reserve you a spot, but we will already have all the information we need in NCA systems at the time of need. It'll make it a lot easier for the family.
Thank you so much, Steve, for that answer. Our next question is coming from Mr. Walter. And his question is, if my wife is not a U.S. citizen, but I was on active duty prior to 1980, can she be buried with me?
Yeah, that shouldn't really affect anything. What I would do, if you do have questions, is I would apply for a pre-need for you and your spouse, just so we can verify that. But as long as you're active, that shouldn't have any bearing. But again, those are the type of scenarios when we want to ease your burden and get a pre-need determination process so we can get you a decision.
Thank you. Another question from Mr. Ed Van Dyke. What is the status of the Hoffman Estates in Illinois? I guess it's a future VA cemetery. I don't know if you have the answer to that question or not, Steve, but
No, I don't, not offhand. I don't know. I know we have several new cemeteries in the works, but I'm not familiar with any in the Illinois area. So I can do some research on that. Send me that question. I can definitely do some research.
great. That was from Mr. Ann Van Dyke, and we do have his email address, and we can get that to you to provide that response to him. That is the end of the questions in the Q&A for right now, Steve. If you have more questions that you would like to ask, just provide those questions to Mr. Ecker or to our team here, and we will get them to Mr. Ecker and get a response back to you in a couple of days. We do have your email addresses. If you need to reach out to any of the presenters or our team, you see our point of contact on the screen here. We'll be glad to reach out to you and help you with anything that you have at this time. I'm going to turn the mic back over to Mr. Washington for closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Hey, thank you. We appreciate you again coming out and taking time out of your schedule to share this great information. As always, it's very good. We appreciate you. Appreciate Jay, your boss, allowing you to come out. And we thank you all for joining us. And if we don't talk to you, please be safe and enjoy your holidays. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. If you registered for this event, we will provide you with the presentation with a disclaimer Steve spoke about in his presentation today. A recording of this webinar and the transcript will be provided on our website at a later date. Please subscribe to our website and Facebook for future webinars and information. Thank you for joining us today and have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.